The sealed stair bowed inward like a held breath in a giant chest. Every new line of authority inside me screamed with the strain. The old stone was not failing yet, but it was learning the shape of failure. Dust sifted down in pale threads. Sigils the sentinel had burned into the floor flickered, recovered, then flickered again. Beneath them all, the pressure from below did not batter or rage. It leaned. Mara saw it too. She pushed herself backward on bloody palms, dragging one numb leg, eyes fixed on the swelling center of the stair. That is not natural. No, I said, because there was no point lying about the obvious. My mana reserve hovered at a sliver. The emergency seal had drained me nearly dry, and the new channels I had inherited only made my weakness clearer. I could feel anchor points below, old conduits sunk into the roots of the hill, all of them clogged, cracked, or folded shut by ancient design. Power existed. Power simply did not belong to me unless I took risks I did not yet understand. The bulge in the stair pushed another inch outward. The sentinel turned its head with mechanical precision. Prisoner contact escalating. Recommend reinforcement, diversion, or sacrifice of upper structure. Mara laughed once, short and shocked. I am assuming I'm the sacrifice in that plan. You are not, I said immediately, and then hated how quickly I had said it. The goblin bound to me crouched between her and the stair, one shoulder hanging useless, chest heaving. Through the fresh bond one felt pain like hot wire, fear sharp as sour metal, and beneath both a hard little knot of refusal. It should have fled. Instead it bared its teeth at the stone. Guard, the bond pulsed. The stupid, brave creature had accepted the role more cleanly than I had. I searched the new functions flooding my awareness. Bind lesser custodian. Redirect mana through anchor. Partial seal access. None of them came with wisdom, only options, and the cheerful possibility of catastrophic misuse. The lowest anchor nearest this chamber throbbed in my senses, dormant but intact. If I fed mana into it, maybe the seal would strengthen. Maybe it would also open a cleaner path for whatever lay beneath to push back. Another shove came from below. Hairline cracks laced across the outer face of the stair. Choice made itself. Sentinel, I said, forcing calm I did not feel. If I redirect mana through the nearest anchor, do I reinforce the seal or rupture it? The construct's furnace eyes brightened a fraction. Insufficient certainty. Anchor network damaged. Estimated outcomes, reinforcement, 43%. Cascade breach, 29%. Mana loss without effect, 28%. Mara stared at the thing, then at my crystal. You can ask it questions now. Her voice shook. Gods. You really are in charge here. In charge was not the phrase I would have chosen for a crystal lodged in stone while an ancient prisoner tested my walls, but the distinction felt petty. I focused on the goblin instead, because fear was easier to sort when reduced to one living problem. Through the bond one nudged an impression, move left, low ground, safer. The creature twitched, glanced at the cracked drainage channel along the chamber wall, then seized Mara's sleeve in its good hand and tugged. She resisted for half a second from sheer disbelief. Then the stair groaned like a ship in winter ice, and she let herself be pulled. Interesting. Not obedience. Communication. The goblin hauled her into the shallow cut beside the wall and crouched over her, snarling at the stair as if it had chosen this position itself. A warm thread of satisfaction came back through the bond. It had protected something. It wanted that to matter. I had no mana for elegance, no time for caution, and no intention of letting the thing below teach me what replacement wardens were for. Redirect through the nearest anchor, I ordered myself, and reached into the buried channel under the chamber floor. Power did not flow so much as tear through me. The world sharpened to white-veined stone, old runes, hidden stress lines, and one immense chain presence turning its full attention upward. The anchor caught, shuddered, and for one impossible instant I felt the whole lower complex like a clenched fist around a buried heart. Then something down there pulled back. Not in defeat. In recognition. And the first voice was joined by another, thinner and much closer, whispering from inside the walls around my crystal, "Warden, do not use that anchor again unless you mean to wake the others." "Then tell me how not to," I snapped into the stone. The whisper came from everywhere the old mortar had cracked, a dry voice catching on dust and age. "By learning the difference between feeding a prison and feeding a dungeon." The bulge in the sealed stair answered for it. Stone pushed inward like skin over a fist. Hairline fractures spread through the fresh sigils the sentinel had laid down, each one bleeding cold blue light instead of mortar dust. My mana, already ragged from taking the wardenship, trickled away into the seal in frightened little streams. Mara saw it too. "That's going to break." Yes. That was not a useful yes. The bound goblin bared its teeth at the stair and planted itself between Mara and the pressure rising from below. It shook badly enough that its knife tapped against the floor, but it did not move. Through the brand inside it, I felt the simple shape of its resolve: fear accepted, ground held. The sentinel stood motionless beside the stair, one arm raised, furnace eyes dimmer now than before. "Current reinforcement estimate, 83 breaths. Can you kill what's under there?" "No." "Can you slow it?" "Yes." "At cost?" "Of course. Everything useful had a cost." I forced my attention down through the new warden senses, away from panic and into structure. The lower complex unfolded in fragments, chains sunk through black rock, anchor points webbed around a central shaft, old channels designed to route mana downward and hold something there. Not block it, I realized. Feed the bindings enough that they remain bindings. The first rule arrived not as a message, but as an ugly little fact. A dungeon did not keep what it hoarded. Power had to move with purpose or it leaked into whatever system was oldest, deepest, and hungriest. I had been pouring strength into walls because walls were what I understood. The prison below understood currents. "Mara," I said, "if I keep you alive, do you obey me for the next minute?" Her laugh came thin and shocked. "That depends how impossible the order is. Stand still. Don't touch any glowing line. If the goblin drags you, go with it." She hesitated only once. "Fine." I reached for the nearest anchor and stopped before I touched it. The warning in the walls had not been fear for my sake. It had been instruction. Don't use that anchor unless you mean to wake the others. Others meant more prisoners, more custodians, or worse things still functioning under old orders. So I searched wider, slower, ignoring the easiest channel and probing for damage. There. A secondary run, almost collapsed behind the chamber wall, clogged with centuries of mineral growth and one deliberate choke of fused stone. Not broken. Pinched. Patient experimentation, Thorne, I told myself, and hated that I still used my own old name when I was frightened. I pushed a thread of mana into the narrow run. The result was immediate and awful. The wall to Mara's left detonated outward in a spray of chips. She screamed and threw herself down as a line of frozen blue fire knifed across the chamber and struck the stair seal sideways. The whole bulging barrier rang like a bell. Below it, something vast hit back. Damage alert. Anchor bleed increased. Seal integrity, 41%. Useful experiment. Mara coughed from the floor. I learned something. Did it have to explode? Yes. The goblin had already moved. It crouched over her, taking the worst of the falling debris on its back, one hand clamped around the hilt of its knife and the other braced against her shoulder as if physically pinning her to life. Through the bond one felt its pain spike, then settle into a hot stubborn knot. Guard. Endure. Guard again. And I understood my costly choice. Sentinel, I said. If I redirect all available mana through the damaged secondary anchor, can you reshape the breach into a vent instead of a seal? Pause. Calculation. Yes. Chamber survival odds improve. Core survival odds decrease. By how much? Unknown. Significant. Mara pushed herself up on one elbow, staring at the stair, then at my crystal. Whatever you're deciding, decide fast. The stone bulged again, farther this time. A claw, black as quenched iron and too large to belong to anything that should fit beneath a hill, pressed through one crack and began to pull. I gathered what remained of my mana, reached for the wounded anchor, and committed. Mana slammed through the wounded anchor like water through a cracked bone, and the entire stair screamed. The claw that had hooked through the bulging seal twitched once as the stone around it softened, not into weakness but into shape. Instead of a clean barrier, the stair compressed into a narrow throat lined with old sigils and fresh heat, a chimney forced from ruin. Pressure that had been battering blindly upward found the vent and roared through it in a blast of black vapor so cold it burned. My crystal flashed with pain. Not metaphorical pain. Not distant system feedback. Pain with edges. Fractures of white light lanced through my awareness as the redirected surge ripped channels open inside me that had never been meant to carry so much mana. The floor around my pedestal spiderwebbed. A warning pain burst across my senses and vanished before I could read more than structural stress critical. The sentinel planted both feet and drove its arms into the shrinking breach. Flow diverted, it said. Containment unstable. Define unstable, Mara snapped, because apparently nearly dying had not dulled her instincts. The answer came from the vent. Something inhaled. The pull yanked loose gravel, broken shields, goblin blood, and one dead soldier's helmet straight toward the stair. Mara slammed flat and clawed at the floor. My bound goblin seized the back of her tunic with its good hand and anchored itself behind a cracked support column, heels digging trenches in the dust. Smart. Desperate, but smart. I fed it a trickle of mana on reflex and felt its exhaustion sharpen into trembling strength. Then the surviving soldiers came back. I sensed them before I saw them, boots pounding the outer corridor, resolve curdled by fear and discipline. Their officers shouted for wedges and hooks. They had not returned to rescue anyone. They had returned because whatever their order had been, it now outweighed self-preservation. Mara heard them too. Her eyes snapped to my crystal. In them I saw calculation become certainty. She knew I was not some blind dungeon reflex anymore. Knew, and lived. Bad. They can't get in here, I said. She bared her teeth. Then stopped talking and stopped them. No point pretending. If she died now, it would be because I let the thing below or the men above take her, and I had already spent too much to tell myself I remained clean. I reached outward through my shallow rooms, through snare lines and weight plates and the crude geometry I had once thought clever enough to survive on its own. Now I used it like a hand closing. The first soldier hit the corridor bend at a run just as I released the trip groove I had kept packed with unstable rubble. Stone poured from the ceiling behind him, cutting off retreat. He shouted once. The second man drove into his back. Their formation dissolved. Spears forward, the officer roared. So he was still alive. Better to know where the spine was before breaking it. I triggered the fungus slick beneath their boots. One soldier fell hard enough to crack teeth, another caught himself on the wall and avoided the drop pit by inches. Good adventurers would have adapted. These were trained, frightened, and rushing. Close enough. The officer burst through anyway, shield high, one eye on the sentinel, one on my crystal. Core, he shouted, and the word hit the chamber like a thrown knife. Mage, away from it. Mara laughed then, one short ugly sound. A little late. He saw the goblin braced beside her, saw the violet mark glowing through its skin, and understood too much. I felt his horror as clearly as if it were mana. Not because I had killed. Men like him expected killing. It was the ordering of things that sickened him, the trap, the construct, the marked creature, the woman not dead where she ought to be dead. Abomination, he whispered. The word should have stung. Instead I measured distance, angle, mass. Sentinel, I said, and did not bother hiding myself anymore, break his line. The construct moved like a dropped gate. Bronze and stone crashed into the officer's shield, drove him sideways, and pinned him against the vent mouth just as the thing below exhaled. Frost darker than smoke poured over him. Metal shrieked. His scream lasted only a heartbeat before it froze into silence, and the essence that ripped free was vast, tainted, and laced with something older than human life. I drank it because if I did not, the thing beneath would. Level increased. Authority expanded. Anchor resonance improved. My goblin looked at me then, not at the crystal alone, but at me, the will inside the stone, and lowered itself between Mara and the vent as the black vapor thinned and something huge began, patiently, to force a second claw through the reshaped throat. The claw that forced through the vent was not merely large. It was wrong in the way a landslide was wrong when it chose a direction, all hooked black chitin veined with dull blue light, each ridge scraping sparks from stone I had shaped only hours ago. My warden stepped between it and the chamber without waiting for command, planting its halberd and driving both feet into the floor as if the hill itself could be persuaded to stand. It could not. The first blow bent the weapon like green wood and hurled the construct back into the sealed stair. Runes burst across its chest in a shower of red cracks. Mana shuddered out of me with the impact. The thing below was not inside my dungeon, not fully, but every place it touched became an argument over ownership, and I was losing. Mara had recovered enough to crawl, one hand clamped over her side, the other dragging herself and the bound goblin toward the far wall. You said that seal would hold. I said survive, I snapped, and instantly hated that I sounded more like stone than man. The claw withdrew a hand span. Not retreating. Testing. Then the voice came again through the anchors beneath my domain, too heavy for ears, felt in every joint of the walls. Open. A prompt flashed across my awareness, clean and merciless. Prison pressure critical. Available responses. Reinforced seal, severe mana depletion, structural loss probable. Venting release, open controlled path to lower hold. Casualty risk extreme. Anchor sacrifice, collapse connected rooms to stabilize prison temporarily. No choice said victory. That was useful in its own way. False hope wasted time. I sent my senses through the anchor web the transfer had given me. The lower spaces unfolded in pieces, abandoned corridors packed with ancient rubble, a circular lock chamber beneath my current floor, 3 dead seals and 1 surviving chain sunk into a shaft so deep my awareness frayed before it found bottom. This dungeon had not been built to house treasure. It had been built as a lid. And I was now responsible for keeping it shut. The goblin made a low sound, not fear this time but warning. Through our bond one felt what it felt, the pulse of cold through the floor, the instinctive map of safe footing, the certainty that the vent mouth was the wound. Simple, immediate, actionable. Better than panic. Mara, I said. Can you move if the ceiling comes down? Her eyes flicked upward, then to me. Smart enough to understand exactly what I meant. Not fast. If you stay there, you die slower. She laughed once, harsh and unbelieving, then pushed herself upright with the wall. The goblin wedged under her arm at once despite its ruined shoulder. Watching it choose her again should not have mattered while a buried horror was trying to peel open my floor. It did. The claw punched through farther, carving the vent wide. Black frost spread in branching lines across the stone toward my crystal. Where it passed, my senses dimmed. Not destroyed. Numbed. If it reached the chamber center, I would lose local control, and then the choice would be made for me. I selected anchor sacrifice. Warning, irreversible loss of developed territory. Confirm Y/N. My first rooms. The kill corridor. The reservoir channels. Every careful trap and shaped pressure point that had turned me from prey into something dangerous. Weeks from now those would matter less than being alive tonight, but knowing that did not make the cost smaller. Yes. The dungeon answered with a groan like a beast deciding to chew off its own limb. Mana ripped from my core and plunged down the anchor lines. Far below, old supports shattered in sequence. The floor beneath the vent dropped half a yard. The claw missed its next purchase. Then the collapse raced outward through my lower works, not chaotic but directed, taking with it the goblin den I had carved, the side crawl that fed my fungus beds, the narrow back route I had meant to turn into an ambush gallery. Stone thundered. Dust burst upward hot and choking. The claw vanished to the wrist, then the elbow, dragged backward as the chamber beneath it caved into the dark. Structural loss, 38%. Prison stability improved, temporary. Mana reserves, critical. Temporary. Of course temporary. Mara stared at the ruin, white-faced. What are you? I looked through the bond at the goblin bracing her up, through the fractured vision of my warden hauling itself from broken masonry, through the shattered lower rooms I would never get back, and answered with the only truth that mattered anymore. The one holding the door. Then, from far below the new collapse, something vast began to climb. The climb from below did not sound like footsteps. It sounded like hooks finding purchase in stone that had forgotten it could bleed. I forced my attention away from the pressure rising through the collapsed depths and into the pieces of myself I could still command. The lower galleries were gone. The old fracture had widened into a wound. Mana seeped through my domain in thin, exhausted trickles. But the prison pressure had eased just enough to give me one sliver of choice, and choice was more valuable than strength. Mara, I said, sharper than I intended. Move away from the collapse. If that thing reaches through again, rock won't save you twice. She flinched, then obeyed, half dragged by the bound goblin. It kept itself between her and the broken stair with a devotion so immediate it unsettled me. I felt the mark I had burned into it pulsing with every frantic beat of its heart, a crude line of command and shared intent. Guard. Endure. Hold. The sentinel hauled itself upright through grinding stone. One arm hung cracked open to the elbow, leaking dull red light instead of blood, yet it bowed its horned head as though damage meant nothing. Warden, it said, anchor network responsive. Recommend redistribution. I reached into the new channels the transfer had opened and nearly recoiled. Beneath my rooms, veins of old craft ran through the hill in deliberate geometry, each one linked to buried anchor points hammered deep around the sealed prison. I had thought myself a small dungeon with a dangerous basement. I understood now that I was the lock built atop a greater cage. And I had just accepted the key. System prompts flickered through my awareness. Anchor route available. Expend mana to reinforce local seal. Expend essence to awaken dormant custodian nodes. Insufficient reserves for all options. Of course not. There was never enough for everything. Human life had taught me that long before death made me crystal. The surviving soldiers outside were retreating fast, but not cleanly. Through fractured stone and tremors I sensed two bodies left behind near the breach, one dying, one already still. Essence bled from both in fading threads. If I let them go, I might preserve the last scraps of decency I still pretended to own. If I took them, I might keep everything above from being torn open by whatever was climbing out of the deep. I took them. The draw hit like cold water down a parched throat. Not enough to fill me, enough to think. I shoved the stolen essence into the nearest anchor line and felt the whole chamber answer. Sigils flared under cracked flagstones. The walls thickened by a handspan. Fractures sealed into iron-dark scars. In the ambush gallery, my dark tubes reset with a sharp series of clicks. The fungus beds in the side passage stirred and spread pale caps through fresh rubble, reclaiming ruin as resource. Dungeon function stabilized. Minor expansion available. Warden link strengthened. The goblin gasped and straightened as some of that reinforcement bled through the bond. Its ruined shoulder drew tight, not healed but braced. It looked at its own arm in wonder, then bared its teeth toward the darkness below. Mara watched all of it with the frozen stillness of someone trying not to understand too much. "You used them," she whispered. "Yes. And if I die here?" The answer arrived in me too quickly. "Then I will use you too." Her face tightened, hurt and fury wrestling with terror. Good. Better hatred than illusions. But before she could speak, the collapsed stair lurched upward. Not bulged this time. Lifted. A slab the size of a cart heaved from beneath as black chains shot through the dust and lashed across the ceiling. The metal was not rusted, not ancient, but wet-looking, as if forged from shadow made solid. It hooked into stone I had not known was shaped to receive it. 1 chain became 3. 3 became 7. A pattern. A mechanism. Not an escape attempt, I realized with a chill that reached deeper than fear. A handhold. The thing below was climbing the prison itself. "Sentinel," I snapped, "can the anchors pull down?" "Temporary resistance possible," it said. "Direct interface required." Meaning me. Meaning not from afar. A new path opened in my senses, a maintenance shaft hidden behind the shattered shrine wall, descending toward the primary anchor chamber in a spiral too narrow for men in armor and just wide enough for 1 woman, 1 goblin, and 1 half-broken construct. The route had been sealed for ages. My authority had just unsealed it. Mara saw the stone split and reveal the dark descent. "No," she said immediately. Another chain punched through the stair and cinched tight. Far below, something vast exhaled, and every torch in the corridor bent toward the opening. "Yes," I said, sending the sentinel forward and the goblin after it. "Because if we don't go down now, it comes up here next, and I don't think this hill survives a second knock."